Nintendo is one of the most litigious companies in the world, doing just about everything they can to protect their intellectual properties. When you look at points in history where their characters or franchises were used with little supervision, it's clear why the company is so protective. As you may already know, Nintendo and Sony were at one point working together in the early 90s to develop a CD-based add-on for the Super Nintendo. When that fell through, Nintendo turned to Philips, who also attempted another disc-based add-on that ultimately never saw the light of day. Still, Philips had secured the rights to produce games using Nintendo IPs for their own system, the CDI. These infamous games have been the butt of jokes on the internet, especially YouTube, for decades, but they're not what we're going to discuss today. Instead, we'll be looking at an ambitious title for the CDI that sought to be a sequel to the Super Nintendo launch title, Super Mario World. Novalogic was a company who, prior to 1990, were primarily known for ports of arcade titles to home computers, such as the Apple II and DOS. Once the company learned that Philips had secured the rights to produce their own games from Nintendo's franchises on the CDI, they set out to produce the next big hit, with hopes that Nintendo would hire them and fund the project. A Nintendo sales representative had noted to the heads of Novalogic that they believed simple Super Nintendo games could run on the Philips CDI, which set in motion Novalogic's proposed sequel to Super Mario World, Super Mario's Wacky Worlds. Silius Warner and John Brooks were hired to design the game, both of whom proceeded to put in 24-hour days for the following 2 weeks. All of this work resulted in half a level that could be presented to Nintendo. Crazier still, the pitch meeting with Nintendo was at 8 a.m. on a Friday morning. The disc itself containing the pitch was pressed just hours earlier at 4 a.m. Properly replicating the sprites of Super Mario World onto the CDI proved challenging, as the Super Nintendo and CDI handled sprites and, well, basically everything different from one another. Thus, all art that was reused from Super Mario World into Wacky Worlds was ripped off a VHS tape that recorded footage of the original played on a Super Nintendo. The single music track and only sound effect featured, the jump sound, was similarly ripped from the Super Nintendo. Wacky Worlds only uses the well-known overworld theme from the original Mario World, though it's believed music would have taken advantage of the audio streaming capabilities of the CDI. As you may have noticed from the footage shown here, not everything in Wacky Worlds was simply lifted from the original game. In fact, Novalogic created plenty of original assets for the game, namely new backgrounds and level tiles that were loosely based on real-world countries or points in time. The pitch meeting with the Nintendo execs went surprisingly well, as they were very impressed with the work that Novalogic had accomplished within those 2 weeks. Nintendo rewarded this dedication by promptly passing on the project, and really, who could blame them? The Super Nintendo was still selling incredibly well, while the CDI was definitely not. Still, Novalogic pressed onward, and before finally pulling the plug themselves, their team had actually completed an estimated 80% of the art, 95% of the design, and roughly 30% of the code. Unfortunately, that's about the most we know about Wacky Worlds. While it's assumed the story or any other details about the game may or may not have fallen under that 95% in the finished design, virtually no other information has come out about Wacky Worlds as of this video. The only truly known detail story-wise was it was Mario, on planet Earth. But as you can see here, we do at least have something to play. There are 3 known prototypes in circulation of Wacky Worlds, the first of which sold on eBay for $1,000 sometime in the 2000s. This particular prototype you've been looking at here is believed to be the last one, shortly before the game was completely cancelled, version 0.11, pressed on March 3rd, 1993. As far as I could find, this is the only version on the internet, with the other 2 likely in the hands of collectors somewhere, but certainly not archived just yet for the rest of the world to see. As it's obviously unfinished, you're given a rather plain menu to choose a level, and not every level is here, mind you. And as we stated before, the only song you'll hear is the overworld from Super Mario World, which I've gone ahead and spared you from because while the song is iconic, hearing it bit crushed repeatedly isn't the best way to go about listening to it. Judging by this menu, there would have been roughly 6 different worlds with about 3 levels apiece. The control is more slippery than Super Mario World, with jumping being hard to predict and extra floaty. Not that it matters much, nothing in the game can actually kill Mario, nor are there any power-ups or anything to collect. Mario can't go swimming or go down pipes, and no levels can actually be completed, meaning when you need to change a stage, you have to reset the entire console. From the looks of things, levels would likely be finished, or at least transitioned, once Mario enters one of these giant M-gates, but unfortunately, Nova Logic never got far enough along to make these function properly. You can bop the Koopas and other enemies on their heads, but that's about it, besides the expected running and jumping. The art created here is pretty colorful, but perhaps not exactly fitting for the Mario series. Although very rough around the edges and extremely buggy almost everywhere, Super Mario Wacky Worlds is still a very impressive title for the CDI, even in the prototype state that it's in. Despite being cancelled, this was not the end of Mario appearing on the CDI, which, if you know about Hotel Mario, may raise some questions. The key here is Nova Logic wanted to get Nintendo involved with the production of Wacky Worlds, which was back in 1992 and 93. Hotel Mario eventually released on April 5th, 1994. So why did Nintendo give this the okay, but not Wacky Worlds? Well, they didn't. While Nova Logic was looking for funding from Nintendo, Philips had the rights already to produce Nintendo's best for their own system. Therefore, Hotel Mario featured no input from Nintendo whatsoever, hence why it's such a strange departure for the series. To this day, Nintendo does not recognize Hotel Mario or any of the 3 Legend of Zelda games on the Philips CDI, and in Zelda's case, it makes sense. Even some of the worst Nintendo-developed Zelda games are still decent in their own right, if not bad solely because they don't live up to the series' legacy. Hotel Mario, despite what the majority of the internet will tell you, isn't that bad. Or at least, I don't think so. Don't get me wrong, it's not really a good game either, but rather a title that came out to the wrong market in about 10 years too late. The gameplay works for the most part, and it's got a pretty solid arcade feel to it. The kind that would munch up your quarters or at the very least, be a solid early NES game, like Wrecking Crew for instance. But as a Mario game, it deviates a little too much from the established formula, while also not doing quite enough with it, which is almost an accomplishment in itself, seeing as Mario has had plenty of spin-offs, from RPGs to sports games, that all do so phenomenally well with the series. That said, according to Hotel Mario's background artist and the art director, they both felt the need to punch up the art by using elements from J.R.R. Tolkien and Disney. That, combined with the infamous cutscenes, is probably a huge reason of what makes it so unlike Mario, despite the series taking shape in so many forms. I can say with confidence that it is a bad Mario title, but not so much a terrible arcade game. The point being here, Wacky Worlds was more in line with what folks would expect from a Mario title. Perhaps instead of Nintendo, Nova Logic should have approached Philips, as they were aware Philips had the license. However, seeing as the developers of Hotel Mario were inexperienced and likely given a shoestring budget, there's a good chance Wacky Worlds may not have fared much better than what we got. Still, in a world of what-ifs and what could have been, Wacky Worlds remains one of the most interesting in Mario's renowned history.